Good evening, good vach, shavua tov. Great to be learning with you on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? My East Coast heroes, past midnight. Sharon in New Jersey, Guy in Ohio, Bill in mid-Missouri, Shandor in the Bronx. Sharon loves starting the week with a Carlbach Niggin. Lorraine in Texas and Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. A twofer. Going to dedicate tonight's class and tomorrow's by Sharon, our very own Sharon in New Jersey, in honor of the yard sites of my grandmother, Tilla Bat Moshe, on the 4th of Elul. That was actually today. And my mom, Baila Feige Bas Eliezer, and my uncle Yaakov Yehoshua Ben Yecheskel, both on the 5th of Elul, which is now and tomorrow morning. And Sharon says, please dedicate a shofar blast in their honor. So we don't do that at night, but God willing, we'll do it at tomorrow's show when it's still daytime on the 5th of Elul. But we dedicate our learning tonight and tomorrow to the grandmother and mom and uncle of our own Sharon Fran Brooks. May their neshamas have an aliyah, great elevation in the world of souls. Also tonight for the healing, complete and speedy of Miriam Bas Rivka. Okay, put that aside so I remember tomorrow, and God forbid I forget, you'll remind me. Nina will remind me. Okay. Our daf is continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 5, here in tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud. Tomorrow also, special show, will be the 1711th page. Why is 1711 special? Because it'll mean we have 1,000 pages to go in our journey through the Talmud. Okay, tonight's daf is page 76 here in chapter 5. Mission number 1 is all about selling a ship and what is included when you sell a ship. Tonight we'll be talking about the kinyan, the act of acquisition, to demonstrate that the ship has gone from the possession of the seller to the buyer. We had a long digression once we were talking about ships, about strange and incredible, wonderful things that the sages had seen related to ships or being at sea. And now we are back to the discussion of our Mishna. We're picking this up near the bottom of page 75b. The Gemara returns to discuss our Mishnah, which discusses the acquisition of a ship. It was stated that there was a dispute among Amoraim with regard to the manner in which a ship is acquired. So Rav says once the buyer has pulled the ship and moved it by any amount, he has acquired it. And Shmuel says he does not acquire it until he pulls the entire ship to the extent that the end of the ship has at least reached the place previously occupied by its front. In other words, if you move this ship so that the rear is now where the front was, so then you have fully moved the ship out of the place where it was and now occupies the, say, adjacent spot, the closest that it can be, and not occupy the previous spot that it was in, right? So when you sell a donkey, okay, so the money's going to change hands. We've agreed how much it's going to cost, but the seller, it's his donkey, and he's liable if anything happens to the donkey until the formal act of acquisition, the kinyan, by the buyer. And when has the buyer acquired the donkey? So one of the ways is pulling the donkey. So once he causes the donkey to move, and we can talk about how far, then for sure he has acquired the donkey. Can you pull a ship? Not so easy. So what are we talking about? Perhaps that the buyer needs to have the ship under his control, and once he has moved it completely out of the spot that it occupied before, so we can say now the ship has formally changed hands, and if something were to happen to it, it's now the buyer's problem and no longer the seller's. So let's continue. The Gemara suggests, let us say that this dispute, whether it's just enough to pull it a little or to fully move it from its space, Let us say that this dispute is parallel to a dispute between Tanaim, the sages of the period of the Mishna. As it is taught in a Baraisa, how is an animal acquired through passing? So if the buyer grasped it by its hoof, or by its hair, or by the saddle that is on it, or by the load that is on it, or by the bit that is in its mouth, or by the bell on its neck, he has acquired it. In other words, if you hand the reins or any part of the animal over to the buyer, then he has acquired it, even if he hasn't caused it to move. How is an animal acquired? Through pulling. So if he calls it and it comes, or he hits it with a stick and it runs before him, so then once it lifts a foreleg and a hind leg from where it was standing, he has acquired it. And Rabbi Acha, and some say Rabbi Acha, says it is not enough that the animal lifts its hooves, rather one does not acquire it until it walks its full length. In other words, fully moves out of the place that it occupied before and has, as like the ship moving from the back to where that its back is now where its front was, right? It has totally moved. Same with an animal. But you see, there's this dispute among the sages. It's enough if it moves a little. No, it has to fully move out of its place. Shall we say that Rav, who holds that a buyer can acquire the ship even by moving it only a minimal distance, states his ruling in accordance with the opinion of the first Tana, that it is enough for the animal to lift two legs? And Shmuel, who argues with Rav, holds that the entire ship, and who holds that the entire ship must be moved. Perhaps he is stating his ruling in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Acha, that the animal must move its full length. But the Gemara rejects this suggestion. Right? No, maybe you can't compare a ship to an animal, and that one says you have to move it its full length, but that's for an animal. That doesn't necessarily apply to a ship. Why? The Gemara rejects this suggestion. Rav could have said to you, I state my ruling even in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Acha. Since Rabbi Acha states his opinion only with regard to animals, as although it lifted a foreleg and a hind leg, it stands in its place. But in the case of a ship, once a bit of it moves, all of it moves, and therefore the buyer has acquired it. So it's enough. In other words, if an animal just lifts its leg, okay, it lifted its leg, it puts it down. You didn't cause it to move. But once you move a ship even a little bit, you caused the ship to move. So that would show to a bystander that this deal has now been completed because the buyer is the one who caused the ship to move. And Shmuel could say, I stated my ruling even in accordance with the opinion of the first Tana. The first Tana states his opinion only with regard to animals, as once an animal has lifted a foreleg and a hind leg, the other legs stand ready to be lifted. But with regard to a ship, if he pulls the entire ship, yes, he acquires it. But if he does not pull the whole ship, he does not acquire it. And the Gemara offers another suggestion. Let us say that the dispute of Rav and Shmuel about whether just move it a little or move it completely out of its place is parallel to the dispute between these other Tanaim. As it is taught in a Baraisa, a ship is acquired by pulling. Rabbi Nassan says a ship and letters, i.e., the content of a promissory note, are acquired by pulling the document and by means of a bill of sale. Now we're on page 76a. So what is a promissory note? A note that evidences a debt. So somebody owes money to someone else. Let's say I owe you $100, and you're holding a promissory note that says Sal owes me $100. Now that note, if I'm a trustworthy person to pay the money, so that note should basically be worth $100. Okay, well maybe you know that I'm away on vacation and I won't be able to pay you the $100 until I return. But you need $100 today. So you could sell that note to somebody else. Let's say he trusts me also, so he's going to give you the $100. Now you've got your $100. He's got the promissory note that I owe $100, and now I owe it to him. How do you formalize the acquisition of that promissory note when you're selling it to that third party? You're selling him the piece of paper. Are you just selling a piece of paper with ink on it? No, obviously what you're selling is the debt that I owe you. So that's what they call the letters of the promissory note, the content of it, as distinguished from the simple paper and ink, which by itself is worth nothing. Okay, so when you're selling the right to receive that money, then you do need this formal act of acquisition. What is that formal act? One is that this guy, after he gives you the money, he takes possession of the promissory note by pulling the paper to him. He takes the paper in his hand and pulls it to him. Or, interesting, by means of a bill of sale. Maybe the paper itself isn't available, but you can issue to him a bill of sale so that he's got written evidence that he purchased the promissory note. 76a at the top. The Gemara clarifies this baraisa. Letters in promissory notes. Who mentioned anything about them? Why should Rabbi Nassan speak about promissory notes which are not discussed by the first Tana? And the Gemara answers, the baraisa is incomplete, and this is what it is teaching. A ship is acquired by pulling, and letters, i.e. the content of a promissory note, are acquired merely by transferring the document and not through pulling. Rabbi Nassan says a ship and letters are acquired by pulling and also by means of a bill of sale. So the Gemara asks, why do I need a bill of sale for a ship? A ship is movable property which is acquired not by means of giving a bill of sale, which is usually associated with a land deal, but through other acts of acquisition. Again, we're talking about how deals were done in the ancient world. Of course, we have bills of sale for movable goods now, but that wasn't necessary because then the sale was witnessed by somebody who, when the buyer took it, the movable object, when he pulled it, when he lifted it, that's when the sale was complete and a bill of sale was not required. So isn't a ship like a movable object that's acquired by pulling and doesn't require a bill of sale? So rather, is it not correct to say that this is what the baraisa is teaching? A ship is acquired by pulling, and letters of credit by passing. And Rabbi Nassan says a ship is acquired by pulling, and letters, i.e. the contents of a promissory note, are acquired through pulling or by means of a bill of sale. And the Gemara asks, if Rabbi Nassan holds that a ship is acquired by pulling, his opinion is apparently identical to the opinion of the first Tana. Rather, the practical difference between the two opinions is the dispute of Rav and Shmuel. In other words, yes, somebody agrees that it's pulling, but how much does it have to be pulled? According to the opinion of one Tana, the buyer must move the entire ship out of its current location, while the other Tana maintains that one must move the ship only a minimal amount. And the Gemara rejects this suggestion. No, everyone, Rabbi Nassan and the first Tana, holds either in accordance with the opinion of Rav or in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. And with regard to a ship, everyone agrees that it is acquired through pulling. We just haven't decided how much it has to be pulled. When they disagree, it is with regard to acquiring letters, i.e. the contents of a promissory note, and this is what Rabbi Nassan is saying to the first Tana. With regard to a ship, I certainly concede to you that it is acquired by pulling, but with regard to letters, i.e. the contents of a promissory note, whereas you maintain that passing suffices to acquire them, I hold that if in addition there is a bill of sale, yes, the acquisition is valid, but if not, the act of passing from the buyer to the seller, from the seller to the buyer, is not effective. And according to this interpretation, the first Tana and Rabbi Nassan disagree with regard to the dispute between these Tanaim. As it is taught in a baraisa, letters, i.e. the contents of a promissory note, are acquired by merely transferring the document. This is the statement of Rebbe. And the rabbis who disagree with Rebbe say whether one wrote a bill of sale but did not transfer the promissory note to the buyer, or whether he transferred the promissory note but did not write a bill of sale, the buyer does not acquire the documents until the seller both writes a bill of sale and transfers the promissory note. So the Gemara asks, in accordance with which opinion did you interpret the opinion of the first Tana of this baraisa? If it is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, then let a ship be acquired also by passing, not only through pulling. In other words, if you, handed over the anchor rope from the seller to the buyer, or if you handed over the captain's hat, perhaps then you have transfer possession. That would be passing as opposed to pulling. That the buyer of the ship now takes control of the ship and asserts that control by causing the ship to move. So that's the difference between passing and pulling. Right? So if it is according to the opinion of Rebbe, then let a ship be acquired also by passing, not only through pulling, as is stated in the following Baraisa. As it is taught in a Baraisa, a ship is acquired by passing. This is the statement of Rebbe, and the rabbis say the buyer does not acquire it until he pulls it, or, new concept for acquiring a ship, until he rents its place. How then can the opinion of the first Tana of the Baraisa be ascribed to Rebbe? Now we're on page 76b. What does rent its place mean? The Gemara will explain, but basically, your courtyard can acquire a movable good for you, like you buy a sack of grain from someone and he drops it off in your courtyard. So then your courtyard acquired it for you, even though you personally didn't lift the bag, but he dropped it off. There's some discussion, as I recall, about whether that courtyard is a secure place or not. But assuming it's a secure place and he drops it off in your courtyard, so your courtyard acquired the sack of grain for you, the movable object for you. If the sack of grain was in a location and you wanted to acquire it and you didn't have the means to pull it, you weren't there, whatever, but you rent the place that the sack is lying in now, so then you have taken possession of the sack. Rather than by literally taking the sack into your domain, you made the domain that the sack is in yours by renting it. And you could do the same thing where the ship, if you rented the ship's dock, then the dock would acquire it for you because it's your dock since you rented it. Now the Gemara answers, now all of this, right, is in the context of a transaction. It's not like you could just, walk up and say, some Jeff Bezos' super yacht happens to be moored somewhere and say, I'm going to rent that dock and now it's my yacht. No. It's only because Jeff Bezos sold me his yacht for $100 million. Might be way more than that even. Who knows? But it's only in the context of me actually buying his yacht. What we're talking about is when I formally take possession of it. And one way I could do that would be to rent the dock where it is moored. Okay. So the Gemara answers, this is not difficult here where Rebbe states that a ship is acquired through passing. He is referring to a ship situated in the public domain. Since a ship in the public domain cannot be acquired through pulling, which must be performed in a domain that is in one's possession, it is acquired through passing. By contrast, there in the first baraisa, the ship is situated in an alleyway. Okay? Which is not the public domain. Somehow it's moored in a place that belongs to somebody, as both parties have the right to keep their possessions there. So a ship in this location must be acquired through pulling. So the Gemara asks, to what case did you interpret that the last baraisa was referring? It was interpreted as referring to the public domain. So if so, say that the latter clause of the baraisa, and the rabbis say that the buyer does not acquire until he pulls it or until he rents its place. So the Gemara asks, but if the ship is situated in the public domain, from whom can he rent the place? So renting the place is not available. And furthermore, does pulling in the public domain affect acquisition? But don't Abaye and Rava both say with regard to the different methods of acquisition, passing, like taking the reins, giving the reins of the donkey to another, affects acquisition in the public domain. But don't Abaye and Rava both say with regard to the different methods of acquisition that passing affects acquisition in the public domain or in a courtyard that does not belong to either of the parties. That's where passing works. Pulling affects acquisition in an alleyway or in a courtyard that belongs to both of the parties. And lifting affects acquisition in every place, even in the seller's domain. Right? So in other words, if you buy something in a store, let's say it's expensive, a diamond ring, or let's say a watch, a delicate watch, you're standing in the seller's shop, you put your money on the counter. When do you acquire that expensive watch and then it's your responsibility if it's dropped and falls and now it's your loss? When you lift it. Okay, makes sense for a movable object, movable property. Can you lift a ship? No, you can't lift a ship, so what are we going to do? The Gemara answers, what does the Baraisa mean when it says until he pulls it? And what does it mean when it says until he rents its place? This is what it is saying. The buyer does not acquire the ship until he pulls it from the public domain into an alleyway, meaning into a private domain. And if the ship is located in the domain of some other owner, the buyer does not acquire it until he rents its place from the owner. And the Gemara asks, shall we say that Abaye and Rava state their opinion in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, not that of the rabbis? And the Baraisa indicates that only Rebbe maintains that one can acquire ownership by means of passing an object in the public domain. I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rav Ashi said the rabbis agree that it is possible to effect acquisition in the public domain through the act of passing. Therefore, if it is a case where the seller says to him, go take possession and thereby effect acquisition, so too he can effect acquisition through the act of passing and does not need to pull it. Here the rabbis disagree with the Rebbe, as we are dealing with a case where the seller says to him, go, pull, and thereby effect acquisition of it. And Rav Ashi elaborates, one sage, the rabbis, holds that the seller is particular about the method by which the item is acquired, and therefore it can be acquired only through pulling. And one sage, Rebbe, holds that the seller is merely indicating the manner to him, i.e., he advises him to use this act of acquisition, but he does not mind if the buyer prefers to perform a different act of acquisition. And the law is like this: if one transfers to another an item that can be acquired by passing in the public domain, saying to him, go pull, and thereby effect acquisition of it, the buyer acquires the item only if he pulls the entire item and brings it into a domain where pulling effects acquisition. The acquisition must take place in this manner because the seller specified acquisition via pulling. And the law is in accordance with the statement of the rabbis in the Baraisa, following the explanation of Rav Ashi. And did we finally figure out how a ship? So how is a ship acquired? Since it is impossible to lift a ship and it requires a great deal of effort to pull it, it is acquired by passing. What needs to be passed? We have not determined that yet. Okay. Sharon, how big of a ship are we talking about? Pulling. Is any form of causing the ship to move considered pulling? Right, so that ended up not where the law is, but it seems like, according to the opinions that say you must pull it, I think what they mean is that you cause it to move. So if it's a small enough ship that you can pull the rope and move it, we wouldn't call that a ship. We'd probably call it a boat. But, you know, I think that since they're also talking about getting it into an alleyway, maybe they're even talking about something that's small enough that it can be pulled up on shore and stored when it's not in the water. I mean, certainly these times they had ships, but even the ships, are barely what we call, we'd probably call it a boat now, right? I mean, how big a ship did they have? 100 people? Probably not even. To my knowledge, 2,000 years ago. I mean, they had ships that were moving around the Mediterranean, Peloponnesian Wars, etc. But they were not so big. So probably even they could be caused to move with a rope. And nonetheless, that's not where the law ended up. It ended up being passing, that you show control. But I think it could have been pulling, where the new owner, unfurls the sail or orders the slaves, terrible, that's the way it was, but causes the ship to be propelled and moved. I think that would constitute pulling. Even so, because it's not really pulling, and actual pulling is too difficult for a ship of any real size, that's why they say passing. We have not really defined what passing is when it comes to a ship. How through passing? Passing is one of the modes of acquisition through which one assumes ownership of animals. It is achieved when one passes the animal to the recipient with the intention that he will acquire it. And some say that this method is effective only when the seller himself passes the animal or a part of it to the recipient. Others claim it is not necessary for the seller to hand the animal to the buyer. Rather, it is enough that the seller tells the buyer to acquire the animal. Once the buyer grasps it, it is considered as though the animal was passed to him. How do we apply this to a ship? Not quite clear yet, and I don't think we have a note on that, unless I missed it. Oh wait, passing can affect acquisition of a ship or similar items only when the item is in the public domain or in a courtyard that belong. Well, that's where it's viable, but we still haven't defined what passing would be with regard to a ship. That's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Good Vok, Shavua Tov. Have a great week.